Hello everyone, and welcome back to our video series, No More Wasted Suffering, Becoming Disciples of the Suffering Servant. As you can see, we're back to our grade B level technology with the awful background and iPad video capacity. That's because my videographer and our parish director of evangelization, JJ Nazaro, is out because his wife Jordan is, as of this recording, is expecting to deliver their second child literally any minute. The baby is 8 days past due, so please pray for them. they're in their own form of suffering and their anxiousness, but I can barely figure out this iPad. I can't figure out the complex lighting and sound and camera works of our new studio, so this is what it is. So we're back to this, but hopefully we'll be back in our studio in just another week or so after JJ's son is born. So anyway, we return to our video series, and our theme today is the suffering of loneliness. Now, in some of our reflections on the sufferings that Jesus was made to endure, we had mentioned loneliness, his friends leaving him, and he's left alone, and various other ways that loneliness was an aspect of his suffering. And so we suffer loneliness too. Now, there are isolated moments when maybe we just feel lonely. It's we're kind of down in the dumps, I suppose, and we're by ourselves. Maybe it's a quiet day and we're used to being out there with folks or whatever, and that can be a sorrow enough as it is. But what I'm really thinking and having what I have in mind is the loneliness, the kind of the chronic loneliness of people who generally they're older, they're not as ambulatory anymore. They can't get out so easily. Maybe they're living at home, not in a community home. But even those that I've visited in community homes are pretty lonely because they're surrounded by people, but they're still lonely. It's not the fact that I'm surrounded by people that alleviates loneliness. It's, am I connecting with people? It's incredible that some of the most alone people in the history of the world, like hermits, were almost never lonely from what we can tell in writings of them or writings done by them. Saint Anthony of the Desert, kind of the first of the major Catholic Christian hermits in our tradition, was a hermit, 50 plus years, 60 plus years of his life. He lived to be 105. That didn't mean that he was alone, he wasn't lonely. But that's because he had such a profound relationship with the Lord that he was able to live that way in isolation of other people because he had regular communion with the Lord. Now that's pretty extreme and also pretty uncommon for the average of us, that we can't pull that off, nor can we just simply alleviate loneliness by just finding ourselves in a crowd of people. In fact, in some certain instances, I would suspect that those situations aggravate the loneliness because I might be surrounded by people, but I'm just more acutely aware that all of these people do not share the same interest that I do. They don't know who I am. I'm just feeling more alone. If you've ever traveled to a different country, for example, maybe part of a pilgrimage group, but then you had some time to wander on your own. I've done this a couple of times. You're surrounded by people who don't speak your language and maybe don't share a lot of your same values. I mean, we're on Christian pilgrimages, visiting Christian shrines, but we're also surrounded by tourists that may not give a hoot. I mean, who knows? So my point of all that is saying, a loneliness is not 100% always and everywhere alleviated simply by putting ourselves in the company of others. So anyway, but loneliness, for folks who are chronically lonely, they are living at home, maybe at home alone, and just wondering if there's anyone left who cares. As I mentioned, it seems like a lot of these folks are older. Maybe they've outlived a lot of their peers that they've grown up with, that they worked with, and so on. And they've all passed away. Maybe all their siblings have passed away. They're like the last of a generation. Maybe their children have moved away, or whatever the case may be. So, like anyone who ever did have a more intimate connection with them, they've gone, and they've gone, and now you remain, and that can aggravate loneliness. And it's important to recognize that we don't see it. We see other forms of suffering, and we experience all kinds of forms of suffering. But I think by the fact that a lot of lonely people are people who do live alone, we don't see it, and so we're not as cognizant of it. We're kind of vaguely aware of it, and then just kind of move on with our day. And when we're in the midst of a crowd, we don't perceive it because, well, we're in the midst of a crowd. How could you possibly be lonely? So it's a form of suffering that's not easily observed, not like other forms of suffering, but nonetheless is painful, nonetheless needs healing or cries out for healing, and nonetheless, for it, we can be agents of healing. Okay, so people suffer this. What do they tend to do? In my experiences visiting folks at home, the homebound, particularly when I was pastor up north, and those were some lonely people. Some of them, the only person they may have seen or had any interaction with for any given month was when I went to visit them, which I made a First Friday rotation of half of Stevens County to go visit folks, sometimes as many as 11, 12 people, sometimes as few as 4 or 5, but spread out. And I would bring the Holy Communion to them certain times a year, bring them the anointing of the sick, hear their confession if they requested, but just sit and chat with them for a while. And then maybe that's it for them till I come again. I would have liked to have gone more frequently. I would also like other people to be able to go and visit them. Here, at least, we have a pretty robust homebound ministry team. Any of you who are watching this who might like to be a part of it, please do reach out to the parish office and we can help you get connected. It's not just a matter of bringing Holy Communion to people, which is important, but just having, just allowing yourself to be an agent of healing, of loneliness, and helping the homebound to feel that that human connection with people. And so, anyway, what do they do when they're by themselves and are lonely? Some of these folks, they just might watch television all day, and they're not even aware of necessarily what they're watching. It's just a way of passing the time or whatever. There's just kind of a sedentary lifestyle made all the more still and not active, because they might be thinking, well, what's the point? No one comes around to see a clean house, so why bother cleaning the house? They kind of think this sometimes, really lonely homebound people. What can we do? What if we are feeling lonely? What can we do? Hopefully we would at least be able to have a spark in us to try to reach out. If nothing else, reach out to the parish, reach out to the pastor, see if I can come out, or if you're watching, you're a different parish, asking if your pastor can just come visit with you for a while. It's not always the case that we can just drop everything, go in that moment, but at least what I do is, it's just as important of an appointment as anyone wanting to come to the office to see me, but I can go visit folks out there, and just talk life, talk faith, talk parish news, whatever it is, bring the sacraments, whatever you need. So if you are the one feeling loneliness, hopefully finding a way to reach out. If nothing else, as I say, maybe your friends and family have passed away, it's just you who remains. But if you have a connection, or once upon a time had a connection with the parish, to try to reach out. And some of our parishioners, our older parishioners that I hadn't met till they reached out, I've been able to go visit at home, and things seem to have gotten better for a lot of them. Some have found ways to arrange rides to come to the parish or meeting other people. So it's a step forward in that healing and finding a solution to it. What can we do? Maybe we're not feeling the chronic loneliness and suffering that, but we're aware that others are. What can we do to help? I already mentioned maybe joining our homebound ministry team, maybe joining our St. Vincent de Paul ministry team as well. A lot of those folks, not only are they just responding to a physical need, delivering groceries and so on, but they'll actually, budget a half hour, or who knows longer, to sit and visit with them. So they're not just delivering groceries, delivering supplies, helping pay bills, but there's a reason why St. Vincent de Paul calls these folks in need our neighbors, because they are. And what do neighbors do? They visit, they share life, and hopefully they share faith, because they're our Catholic Christian neighbors. So we can join any of these our homebound ministry team, our St. Vincent de Paul ministry team. What can we do personally? Maybe you're kind of homebound yourself, not ambulatory, not able to get around, but you're not necessarily lonely, but you'd like to do something. I would like to see if we can expand some kind of, regular outreach to folks at home in the form of Easter greeting cards. Easter's coming up, Christmas cards, find out when some of these folks' birthdays are, send them birthday cards, things like this, give them a call. We can do a lot of these things without having even to to leave the home if we ourselves can't easily leave the home. But the point is, all those are just mechanisms that we can use to try to initiate a human connection with those who are lonely. And certainly, and I can't stress this enough because I say it often anyway, but certainly we ought to pray for them. For those who are suffering from loneliness, particularly chronic loneliness, we offer prayers for them. And certainly we can do this, pray that they will be consoled in their time of suffering, that the Lord would in a particular way make his presence, his reality, his love for them known so that they feel a communion with the Lord of all creation, and that they're just not another body on this planet, but a soul treasured by God. So these are things that we can do to help folks in their loneliness. And so the suffering of loneliness, thank you for joining me today on this, our weekly podcast or video cast or whatever we're calling it. No More Wasted Suffering, Becoming Disciples of the Suffering Servant. Please join me again next time. God bless you all.